Hi again, everyone. And on today's episode, I've got David Evans. Let's start with just saying hello, David. How are you going today?
Well, thanks, Jermaine. Thanks for having me here. Looking forward to this.
No worries. So let's get started with what you do, David.
What do? I like to help people save time and really help them take the first steps into building wealth. So really,
Okay.
it's
So would you say is it finance, accounting? What's your background? How did you get here?
a chartered accountancy background.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've worked in banking roles. I've worked in senior management roles. Now I work mainly with small business and individuals in terms of developing small business and personal budgets.
Okay. So give me an idea of kind of your experience and what led you to where you are now. So at the moment now you're working with small business, medium business. Is that kind of your area that you're working in?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time working with the business enterprise centres around, well, mainly in Queanbeyan, but have gone further afield. Also, drought assistance budgeting services with the Department of Primary Industries at times, under contracts with them to sit down with families that are really suffering financial stress on the farm and realising that the household has to carry the farm through. So it's very much getting the household budget right.
Okay.
So.
And before that, you were in the corporate space, and then slowly, I guess, made your way to the small business, the more individual kind of level stuff. Is it accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
In the corporate space, in the consumer products, almost fast-moving consumer goods.
Okay. So, what are there any brands that you worked with that we'd be aware of?
The first of those I worked with when I was actually living overseas, operating in the international level, was working with Speedo swimwear, which was quite an exciting time. That was actually the financial controller role for Speedo International.
Okay.
Looking after licenses and the royalties from all around the world, getting the designs out, making sure the licenses were in place, and later on having an operational role developing Speedo through South America, signing up licensees through South America.
Okay. Wow. So you've had a lot of experience over the years then. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
I'm nearly 60.
No. Wow. You don't look that old. So how long's your working career been in this space, in the finance space or the money space?
In the money space, I started a Bachelor of Commerce from University of New South Wales in Chartered Accountancy. So I started as an auditor, then worked into indirect taxes. And quite a bit of time with GST, or the European equivalents, the VATs, which is adding your extra value to a product or a service and charging the tax on that and passing it through. So that's really from the very early 80s through to now, either at the corporate level, in company management, in the banking level, in lending.
Sure. So you worked overseas for a while, and now you're not in Canberra, are you? You're in the region, but you're in where you live?
I live near Braidwood, which we've been out there for about 14 years, and we lived in Canberra for about 6 years before we moved back from overseas.
Okay, sure.
My wife's from Canberra. We came back to Canberra. We moved back from overseas, and we've been in the region since.
Yeah, nice. So talking about your back to your focus now. So now you're working in sort of the small, medium business, individual sort of space. What drove that change, and what are you looking to do in that space now? What are your hopes, goals, and
what I want to achieve now is actually to build a very good web-based business that will allow me to deliver or to provide a good suite of budgeting products for individuals, and to be able to run the business, to spend more time at home rather than having to go to an office and come back, go to an office and come back, to actually spend more time at home, to be able to promote the products with podcasts and look after people that way. I'm still happy to pick up the phone if somebody has some questions that I haven't answered on a frequently asked questions list. I certainly don't want to lose contact with people that I've worked with, but this is just a better way at this stage to get the product out to more people, and to be able to move around, and to be able to move around the state more, and even to do seminars around the state.
So location independent kind of business for yourself, where it's very much online. and delivering and still being effective and making a difference in people's lives, but doing it through a web sort of service versus in person. So essentially you can go that one to many versus that one-on-one, because I guess your time like everyone's time, your time's limited, and there's a limit to how many people you can spend every year working with.
Yeah. So So the one to many, when you might do a regional seminar and they might be there for a few days and you do the one-on-ones with the people that actually say, hey, can you give me some more help? Well, I still enjoy the one-on-one working through. Also a very good way to get product feedback if you're actually working through it with somebody and realizing, hey, this works really well, or gee, everybody gets stuck on that point. I need to rework that in the product so it makes it a better product.
Sure. So to a lot of the people listening, I'm sure they're getting vibes of, is it Scott from Barefoot Investor? So how's what you do different to, say, the Barefoot Investor? Obviously, you don't have a book yet, or is there a book in the works, or what's the difference?
There's not a book, but with the packages, each of the budgeting packages, whether it's a one pager or whether it's a single pager on a screen for a young child who wants to look after their pocket money. So it ranges from that. So a young child might get $5 a week for babysitting their younger brother, mowing the lawn. What do they want to spend it on? Well,
you can kind of sort it all out.
Topping up their phone, or a present for mum, or something like that, and they can see 10-year-old can see $500 going through their annual budget and wanting to save for Christmas or something like that.
Yeah, so this is really about giving people, well, no matter who you are, whether you're young or old, money skills that I would argue should be taught at a school level, should be ingrained in everyone when they're growing up. Is that
right? Yes.
Fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. And I've actually spoken to people about actually going into high schools. It's not just in the economics class, in the same way that schools used to, but don't as much anymore, even teach home economics. It used to be all to the girls. That's how old I am, that I went to school when they teach home economics.
Yeah.
It was teaching cooking. But they would teach cooking, but they didn't teach budgeting. So they've actually got to bring that back in. And you see more and more shows on television these days saying you've got to be financially savvy. You've got to actually learn to budget. And why aren't we teaching our kids to budget?
Yeah.
So it starts, but getting back to, you said, is there a book? Well, the instructions are so clear on how to work each product. That's almost a book in terms of, your gross income, your tax, opportunity to salary sacrifice, how you're going to spend your money. And some of them have a report that actually has your income, your tax, your super, your cash flow, and at the bottom, your own personal balance sheet.
Yeah.
Did you actually increase your personal position during the year, or did you go backwards?
Yes. So are there?
See all that.
I can't think of any tools that are like this. I have looked, but I haven't seemed to find anything along these lines. Is it fair to say that there aren't many other tools like this? There aren't many other competitors out there?
I think it is fair to say that. I've probably looked longer and harder than you have actually to see what else is out there to make the budget package unique. You can look on the government websites, and sure, there's a bit of stuff of, take the money coming in, and do you want to mix and match it? But they're kind of not packaged in sort of a tight fashion. So some of these packages, they're really quite small on your computer, which is a very important thing. You can, even to the extent they're designed so that you can send it backwards and forwards to your advisor, it's quite small. You have a look at this.
Yeah.
It actually does help you organise your tax position. What if I do salary package a car? Do I sacrifice more super? First homeowner superannuation scheme has actually got a separate spot for that, and calculates when you take it out to buy your first home. So yeah, it is a very much a beginning to end for 1, 2, or 3 jobs. If it's a young person who really wants to get ahead, they've got their main job, there's another job. Well, that actually takes those 3 jobs, and then we'll work out your PAYG from each one as you go along, and then add the 3 together and work out your tax at the end of the year.
Right. So it's a tool to really also actively get an idea of your current financial position in terms of, how much tax you've got to set aside, and how much tax you'll be paying, and what money you'll be getting back, and all that sort of thing as well. So personal finances, really.
That's right. So if you started now and it's the beginning of August, you could build yourself a good budget for going through to June 2020 on on what you know you'll do. And it's like, well, if I want to go overseas on that holiday, year and a half, I need an extra $10,000. So at the moment, it tells me I need to get that from somewhere. Well, let's go and see if I get a second job, and I'll put that in there. And if I can get 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week, oh, look, I can spare that. 10 hours a week, that I can earn and save that money. I might earn 10,000, but it's going to take 2,000 from me in tax, which might seem high on 10. But remember, I've already got the other job up there, so I move into a different tax bracket. So it'll explain all that and take away all the surprises of that, getting that second job, then getting to the end of the year and going, you have to pay tax. What?
Yes. Yeah. Where did this come from?
Where did this come from? Why didn't somebody tell me I'd have to?
Yeah. And so think about the listeners again. I just want to ask you if you have any quick tips that you could give us around personal finance, any mistakes that you've seen that people regularly do. I mean, the big thing for me, I think, is that they miscalculate how much tax they're going to be paying. And in some cases, correct me if I'm wrong, but some employers don't take the correct amount of tax in terms of PAYG, and then you might be left with a debt at the end of the financial year, etc.
Employers can make that mistake about not taking enough out, and it's sad to say that it is your responsibility at the end of the year in terms of having to pay more tax. You can go back and correct them, but at the end of the day, you've still got to pay that more tax and make sure they get it right next year.
Yeah.
One of the ones these days that gets a lot of people who might be doing a little bit of salary sacrifice, they're encouraged by every morning show and every website to say, try and put more away into your superannuation, sacrifice a little bit more. So they might have been earning, let's say their salary is 65,000 and their super's calculated on that 65,000. If they sacrifice some of that money, some of that gross income, and to add more into their super, which they've been encouraged to do, a less than scrupulous employer might say, well, you just put 2,000 in, so now I've only got to pay you superannuation on 63,000, because that's my obligation on your taxable income.
Right.
Be very aware that if you're going to do salary sacrificing for your superannuation or a car, more and more people are encouraged to do that. Make sure that you ensure that your employer is paying your super on your full wage and not your net wage after you've sacrificed, because that you think you're doing the right thing here, but it can be very costly here, and the net effect can be even negative in the longer term because you're getting less into your super.
Yeah.
Start sacrificing to super and saving and investing as soon as you can. Talking to a young fellow the other day, and he was putting whatever spare money he had, or he was making sure he had spare money, and he was putting it into managed funds. And he said, old me is going to love young me because this money I'm putting now will be worth a lot out there. Yeah. So it's not much to give up now, but it'll be a lot for me later on, and I'm going to think I'm a pretty big bloke for doing it.
And it's a compounding effect, isn't it? At the end of the day, a coffee a week doesn't seem like much in the short term, and it isn't. But a coffee a week ends up being 50 coffees in a year. That's right. And that's what you put $200 to $250
into your managed funds or something like that.
Yeah.
And you said it's that compounding effect.
And that's without taking into account that growth that the managed fund would have anyway. So your $5 is actually worth more in the future than it is right now, regardless.
Yes. Yeah. Very soon, it earns interest, and then an interest starts earning interest on itself. That's called the power of compounding. And Albert Einstein actually said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world.
So something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Time in your portfolio, is the most valuable thing you can get.
Yeah. So going back to your career and what you're doing, so can you take me back to some key milestones? I'd love to hear about points at which. So let's say when you came back to Australia, what milestones did you kind of hit to go, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my life. This is let's say this is how much I have in the bank, and this gives me this freedom. What was that journey like, looking at the milestones that you hit throughout your career and how you reacted to the positives or the negatives of those things?
Yeah, Well, moving back from Australia coincided with the starting of with a family. The eldest now is 21.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who's now studying at university, as is the second one, and the third one will be studying at university next year as well. So, really, from moving back from Australia, which was 1997 or so, I actually allowed myself a couple of months. I'd been working fairly hard and putting in sort of 6.5 day weeks, 6.5 day weeks, traveling around on planes, off planes, on planes. So it was wonderful to have sort of earned a couple of months sabbatical. I grew up in Armidale, which had a university town, and everybody there seemed to go on sabbatical leave. So I sort of, after 15 years working at that stage, had also thought I'll take a couple of years sabbatical with a new child, and it was just a great opportunity to be able to have that.
Yeah. And then did you decide from that point onwards, once you came back, that you were going to go into business for yourself or work for yourself, or did you work for someone else for a while? Or
I did some contracting work, but I thought I will work for myself, but work for others, so you can stay your own person and actually control your own destiny a little more than having other people decide what you're doing. There's a little bit more risk in that, but you can look at the numbers and say, hey, I've got the foundation to be able to go and do that now. So being in Canberra, I've worked for a small private enterprise. I've worked for some of the larger government agencies where you're going to do a project, and I'm always on the financial side, and I got good feedback on that in terms of doing financial analysis for the provider panels and that sort of thing.
Right. Okay.
Where then the big firms that I kind of used to work for a long, long time ago would be bidding for work. They didn't know who I was. They'd been gone long enough. There wasn't any link there. So it was really a case of working out, okay, what do we need? This is a good way to do it. Sort of looking at super, and going from there. That's right.
Yeah. So it sounds like business for you has been, correct me if I'm wrong, but quite a lifestyle thing, more than just money. It's, for you, business is about how it works in with the kind of life that you want to lead and the kind of life that you want to have. Is that accurate?
It has been, because I really had to sort of, looking after children and making sure they're okay first. It's finding a job that I actually could work around, making sure they were taking places, making sure they were doing what they want. So if you're finding projects that's like, well, I can read them a story, then put them to bed, and then I can work on this project and deliver the project. It was a way that was that fitted much more into the lifestyle. I think more and more people these days are realising that fitting your work in around your own needs and fitting your own needs around your work should be given an equal weighting.
Yeah, instead of say missing the kids' recital or missing sport for work, it's about how you can get the work done, but also go to sport and coach the team.
It's about making sure you go to that recital first.
Yes.
Because you do a transition at that stage from saying, well, I've had my life growing up, now I'm grown up, now I've got to take responsibility for this next lot, and then doing it that way. And getting the fun and the joy out of what
of course. Yeah. And it sounds like you hopped on that wave before. I would say over the last couple of years, it's really started to become a wave that people are making lifestyle decisions that obviously affect them financially and in their business. But it sounds like you hopped on that train very early.
Yeah. And then people might think, gee, you're working longer, but you're not really. Your working hours might spread out, but you've got the breaks and the gaps in there. And I think you're finding more and more now for studying at university, for example, it's like if you can work in 10-minute packets and then stop and do another 10-minute packet. So it's kind of like packaging your work up into this around everything else rather than having that.
Yeah, that 9 to 5.
9 to 5, the Dolly Parton sort of, says, where's everybody out?
Yeah. Working for myself, I can totally see the same thing happening in that some days you just don't want to get into work till a bit later on, or if you're like me, you're not necessarily a morning person or the most productive early in the morning, and that means
Yeah,
that you can have a 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. day if you know that, after you have a nice big lunch is when you really become productive or are really creative, and then you just work till 7 o'clock and head home afterwards, and just gives you that flexibility around what you're doing.
that's right. Or you might find, you might be thinking, well, I've got an admin day tomorrow, but you wake up and you're thinking, this is too beautiful a day to waste on admin, and my mind's in a really good place. I'm going to do some creative stuff, or
Go outside and sketch, or go outside and come up with concepts.
Or do some good stuff.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
You need a break. I'll take the dogs for a walk for half an hour.
And
I don't think there's anybody that can't tell you they haven't come up with the best idea of the day while they've been outside walking their dog.
Yeah, that's so true.
Because they're watching that dog and he's looking so happy. It's like, and it just feeds back to you, and your mind is, all the rest of the clutter goes away.
Yeah. So now we've talked about the really good stuff, that you've done, and the really exciting stuff. I want to quickly touch before we wrap up on any sort of big mistakes that you made that you can kind of look back and go, I really learned a lot from that mistake. So you might not regret it, but something that you can tell us, or a few things that you can tell us about that we should look out for, whether it's, finance related or business related, that easy mistakes to make.
Yeah, I think probably one of those is not ignoring your gut feeling about an idea. I think probably a lot of stress is caused internally by people trying to override their gut feeling, knowing it's no, this is not quite right. But at the other side of the coin, maybe the little bit of greed in them can see, boy, this is fantastic if it comes off.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to reconcile your gut feel saying this is not for you, these people aren't for you, as opposed to the reward. So once you move away from thinking, well, and as you get older, your gut gets more experienced, by the way. It learns as well as you do. Sometimes the lessons are pretty hard. But usually if you don't have a good gut feel about something or somebody, there's probably a good reason for it. Okay? So I would say number one rule, go with your gut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and you'll find that, and you will have a better way. You'll have a better way through your business life.
Sure. And you've found that your gut feel has improved over the years, or do you kind of look back and say to yourself, actually, I should have trusted 30-year-old me just as much as I trust 50-year-old me, because back then that feeling was right, and that feeling was still, correct.
That was right. It might make you. It might mean you're a little bit risk averse, but it just all depends. And I guess it depends on the responsibilities you have at the time too. My gut says this is not a good idea, but I'm single, no dependents, I haven't got a lot to lose.
Might as well take the risk.
Take the risk, as long as it's legal.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. And you do have to put that in there, because some people think, well, are these people, am I taking on a responsibility that could actually get me in trouble? Be very careful there.
Just being smart.
There's that one, and that kind of ties through to focusing on the things you can change. Let your gut focus on the things you can change, and just navigate through the things that you can't change.
And letting go of that.
Once you've got through and made that change, you've got the experience, or you can actually go back and change a couple of those things that you couldn't then, but you can now. Yeah. Actually go back and do that.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So now we're getting towards the end of the podcast. Let's finish off with the top 12. This is my favorite part. So we'll go through top threes across 4 different questions. And, I hope that this is really valuable for the listeners. If there's any part of the podcast that I want them to listen to, it's the top 12, because it gives them an idea of the tools and the books and the resources that people who've done well for themselves, and people who've really had a good life and are planning for a nice life, use these tools and tips and tricks. So let's get started with the top 12. Are you ready?
Already? Yep.
Yep. Okay. The top 3 podcasts or books that you recommend. What top 3 things would you recommend there?
The top 3 books. I mean, limiting somebody that likes to read to only 3 books or something like that is actually quite cruel. But you could talk about 100 books of different ones. But I've always sort of gone through trying to read a novel and then read a non-fiction book, read a textbook, or even a chemistry textbook. And it makes you realise that, God, I wish I'd read this more when I was actually doing chemistry at school, because this is actually really quite interesting. So I guess sending that message there is mix up your reading between fiction and non-fiction. And to anybody that's out there that's still at school or something like that, make the most of it now and really read that textbook, because you'll realise it might not be too useful now, but it can help you in so many avenues down the track. For example, when I was working at Speedo, if I'd actually been able to talk about, hydrocarbons and plastics when I was talking about the fabrics they used to make swimwear, you would have actually been able to make a much better contribution and understood half the people in the room at a chemistry conference.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of stuff. But the books, top 3 books are all the things that I'm interested in at the moment. There's a book called Tuesdays with Maury. That's written by a fellow called Mitch Albom. He was a university student and he's sociology professor, who he really loves his classes, does all his classes, catches up with him 20 years or 30 years later when Maury's actually dying from, it's not motor neurone, but something very similar to motor neurone. He's losing his ability to move. And it's about Mitch, who's a famous sports writer, chasing the dollar. And when the company he's working for all goes on strike, there's a journalist strike, it frees up the opportunity for him to fly from Chicago to Detroit every Tuesday, to have Tuesday afternoons with Maury and listen to Maury, the sociology professor, talk to him about what's important in life and what's not. And there's a lot more to life than just chasing that dollar and getting material possessions. It's, it's family and giving. And Maury actually gives some pretty good advice to Mitch, and they talk about it being Mitch's final thesis.
Right.
What's really important in life at the end of the day, what you can take with you and what you can leave behind.
Yeah.
Another book I've always liked. In a previous life, I used to fly commercially a lot. I wasn't a pilot, I was a passenger. But I used to love 747s, and there's a book called Wide Body by an engineer called Clive Irving. And it's an interesting one at the moment when you see all the trouble they're having with the Boeing 737 Maxes, which got some pretty poor quality issues. The Wide Body really was about the history of commercial aviation. It was about the development of Pan Am placing the first order for Boeing, which really gave Boeing the encouragement with a big enough order to go ahead and build the 747. If they hadn't had that, that wouldn't have been built. But it was such a brilliant plane, even on day one, because of the engineering, and it had a quadruple redundancy in it. There wasn't one sensor, there were 4 sensors. And the pilots took it up on its first flight, and it's like, we don't need to do any more testing in this. We can, except for a couple of problems with some engines, we can pretty well take this across the Atlantic and show London how good it is.
Wow.
With that 737 Max, for example, there's only one sensor in that, and that's what caused those issues with the 2 accidents. So I think that sort of shows the quality of the engineering in the olden days, and now kind of the cutting corners. And if you look at the Boeing business model back then, it was build the product and we'll work out what it costs. And it's quite unfortunate in a way that so many commercial pressures from around the world these days are, we have to build the product to a certain price point, and to meet that we have to cut a lot of corners.
Yes, some business lessons there.
It's just been a transition in business in the last 40, 50 years of the countries that are rising and making stuff.
Yeah. So how about the third book?
A third book or a podcast
is
actually, it's called Warming Signs. Global warming is a huge issue, especially for the younger generation coming through, who I think must have real concerns about it. There's a very good podcast called Warming Signs. It's a girl called Kate, a young woman called Kate Parker in the US on the Weather Channel. 10, 15-minute podcasts where she will bring somebody in very experienced in their field, who she will let talk and let speak about their fields. Some podcasts, sometimes the person's speaking too much.
Yes.
She'll actually let them talk. There's one about, do we need to go to nuclear power? What are the issues there? 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. What were the lessons we learned? Do we have to go versus coal? When do we have to go that tipping point from carbon in the atmosphere to the risk life's all about swapping one risk for the other. So that has to be made. And the other one's somebody talking about if we have to bring women into farming and let them run the farms. The men probably still do the work, or make the men do the work. And smaller farming and more food production, and moving back to the circular economy where we just come back to smaller communities that don't travel as much.
Yeah, very interesting.
Warming science, Kate Parker.
Okay, thanks for that. So moving on to the top 3 software or tools that you can't live without.
There's probably only one I can't live without, and really all the packages I offer are based on Excel. I like Excel. I can probably use. I know it's an extremely powerful tool, and maybe 15% of its ability to do what I need it to do.
Yeah.
Really, so those are the software tools. I guess this podcast is something that's going to be more and more that we can't do without. And because I was saying earlier, that's how I want to run my business, by speaking to people. So that will come in. So I guess you'd call that. This has got Zoom on the screen, so Zoom seems to be
Zoom's another one as well.
The prime product at the moment.
Yeah, I must say I love Zoom. I do love it. It's Skype's good, but Zoom's just that much better. Moving on to the next question. Top 3 mantras you try and live by.
Yeah, I've already mentioned one, and that's focus on what you can change and navigate the rest.
Mm-hmm.
If you can spend a lot of energy trying to change something you can't at that point, it seems a bit silly. So find your way around it and make your own way. The other one, in terms of a lot of people, they're held up making something perfect. 95%. Let it go. Put it out there. If you go for perfection, somebody else is going to come along with an inferior product, but they'll be first to market.
Yeah.
They'll take the space you're after. And you'll be sitting on the sidelines going, yeah, but mine's better, Mine's
perfect. Yeah, no one will care.
No one will care, because you're down like that. And again, as I said before, trust your gut. With experience, your gut will get better. So trust your gut.
Trust your gut.
You might look back and think, I missed a couple of opportunities. Or at the time, you might think, I missed that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But 10 years later, those people are, not where they said they'd be, or they're in court.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, I'm glad I didn't go with him.
Yeah. Awesome. Trust your gut. The last one. So the top 3 people you follow and why you follow them.
The first fellow is a fellow called John Green. I used to work for John. I worked for John for 5 years. 5 years when I was living overseas. He was a Canadian fellow who grew up in the poorest streets of Canada, and he had a terrible temper. at least at that stage. But he was the sort of person that every day would try and would have a mantra. And even at his funeral in 1998, somebody stood up and said, the best you can do for this fellow is make yourself a little bit better every day. Because that was John's goal, in terms of if you can learn a bit more about yourself and improve yourself. And he did a lot of self-study courses to find out why do I get so angry? Why do I lose my temper? And he went back that he realised when he was very little, he developed a fight mechanism. Run or get beaten up, and he got sick of running, so he started losing his temper so he could fight better. He trained himself to lose his temper.
Yeah, wow.
At age 10 or something like that. At age 65, he trained himself to not lose his temper by going back and working out and undoing what he had trained himself. A neuro-linguistic programming. He was a practitioner in neuro-linguistic programming, John Bandler, where he could speak to somebody and he could ask them a question. He would just from their body language and their eyes, work out whether they were making the answer up, whether they knew it, whether they would just had it stored somewhere or weren't sure, or were just saying something to please you.
Yeah.
But just, nobody could put anything over him. He was a very clever man. And one of the little newsletters is called Earned It 3 times, lost it twice. So he did make 3 fortunes, and he did lose it twice. He was very wealthy at the end. And hearing the stories about those, some of those go back to those mantras of trust your gut and change the things you can and leave the things you can't.
Yeah. Wow.
Another fellow I follow is Ricky Gervais, the the comedian from The Office. Why do I like him? Because he just makes people look at themselves and stop taking themselves too seriously. I love the way he busts political correctness away and just look down to the nitty-gritty, folks. This is what life's all about. Let's not be politically correct, because it really doesn't do anybody any good.
So do you follow him on Twitter or just all over the place wherever he pops up?
Podcast, Facebook.
He's got a podcast as well.
Yes, yeah, and he's a very funny fellow. I mean, other comedians have come through and followed him, and he introduces to some other pretty good comedians as well. I think following comedians is very important, because they actually do break through a lot of the sort of the falseness that's around. You actually see what's real about what we do.
Yeah,
it's very important. Yeah. And the other people I follow is actually three. It's my three kids in terms of where they are now. They all had goals. They're doing what they want to do now. They didn't get their first go, but tried again, and now they're all three are where they want to be, doing what they're doing.
Yeah, wow. So just keep trying.
Just keep trying. Yeah. And so that's actually 5 people I follow. Okay. So yes, they're the people I follow, and it's just it's encouraging. It's good.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. That was the top 12. I think there's a lot of value there. I particularly liked the mantras that you put through. I think it's important that, I agree with all of them. And I think it's important that people have these mantras so that they can just check themselves. It's easy to kind of go, nah, it's kind of hocus pocus, this and that. But sometimes I think it's as simple as having something written down on the palm of your hand, something that you need to remember to remind yourself, trust your gut, or you don't have to be perfect. And just having it there, I think makes the difference versus just, telling yourself that you know that it doesn't have to be perfect. But in reality, how often do you actually check yourself and make sure that you're not just waiting for perfection? I've caught myself many times. I know that it doesn't need to be perfect, but when someone asks me, "Oh, Jermaine, did you get that done for me?" and I go, "Sorry, I'm still waiting to get it right. I've got to make a few more tweaks." Well, no, check yourself. You don't need to make that many tweaks. You can always reiterate. Everything's, it's so easy to change some words on a website nowadays that it doesn't have to be perfect the first time around.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that, because one of the other comments that John Green, the fellow I mentioned, who is continually trying to make himself better, used to say when he would ask somebody to do something and they would say, "I'll do my best," he would have one of two responses. The first one was either, "No, don't do your best, just do it. If it takes more than your best, then you've got to go past that to get the job done." Or he would say to a person, "No, this doesn't require your best. It's a very simple task. Just do it."
Yeah, just get it done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right. So
for later.
Wrapping up the podcast, where can we find you? I know you're working on a new website, so I'll have the link to the new website down in the show notes. Anywhere else that we can follow you at the moment, or still working on?
If I can say, the best place to find it at the moment is probably find it through Future Theory. If I can ask for a referral through Future Theory, if that comes back through.
Sure.
Future Theory. Okay.
That sounds good.
Yes, and against that very soon, where we'll have the website in terms of the budgeting tools and all the rest of the stuff, and a personal blog, which might be other thoughts of mine.
Sure. I mean, by the time this podcast goes live, it'll probably,
have the link.
We're a couple months away, I think, in terms of scheduling where this podcast will go out. So by the time it goes out, there'll be the tools there ready for people to check out, and we'll link to it all. And
Yes.
Thanks for your time, David. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you.
No worries.
Yes.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right.
All the best.
Bye.